Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this Truth Bomb Riff. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I am joined by my colleague, one of my favorite people on the planet, Roseanne Rabiola Mile, and we're recording this on
It's
Monday,
Monday, December 29th.
December 29th, right before New Year's. And yeah, I thought it'd be a pretty compelling time for us to have this dialogue, considering a lot of the stuff that we've been in the midst of. So, where do I want to start? I think I want to ask you the question, you know, just to kind of set this up. You and I were talking last night about kind of the sort of pros and cons of social media and how you're dealing with things and what I'm dealing with. And we have two different kind of pathways. And we're trying to build a movement. And what we frequently say is we're building the plane while we're
And
flying it.
flying it at the same time.
Right. And you've been in politics for a long time. You've been in a lot of variety of things, and I've said this many times before, but just for those who are kind of tuning in for the first time. And I should say, I think we're up to our 720th truth bomb over the course of approximately 3.5 years. It'll be 4 years next, well,
It's in February.
February. Yeah. As I started this journey, and then you've been along every step of the way. And in that sort of routine, it's been Groundhog Day over and over and over, trying to find a pathway to people's minds and hearts to get them to understand what we're in the midst of. But this far into it, I mean, we've made some really great strides. But compared to the information that we have and the millions of people that are looking for it that haven't been able to find it and can't reconcile it for a whole variety of reasons, right? Um, it's been really challenging. And so I think the first question I want to ask you, because your miss is followed by how many followers do you have on Blue Sky?
I I have 31,600.
You have 31,600 and 31,600. How many do you follow?
About 40,000.
Okay, so there's a ratio right there that's kind of interesting. You got to play to be able to be in the game to get more followers, and there's a trick to it. But there's also a semantically, if that's a word that I want to use that's appropriate, to describe the effort of dealing with the algorithms to get people the information that they seemingly aren't seeing, but yet they're connecting, but they're not. Give me kind of what it looks like from your angle.
So, what I do, first of all, and I found this quote yesterday in an article that you sent me from the New York Times. And it's from Victor Hugo. And if people don't know who he is, he's the person who wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Okay. And so he's pretty important in my mind. I don't care what other people think. But anyway, Victor Hugo said,
Important in history. Are you kidding? Of
yeah,
course.
okay. Nothing is more imminent. Nothing is more imminent than the impossible. So, ever since I've been a kid, I don't look at this is impossible, that's impossible, I can't do this, I can't do that. I simply do. So, what my thinking is on social media is I simply do. I post, I follow, I repost, I reply, I look at what other people are seeing. I'm not thinking about what that immediate outcome is. I have a path to follow, and my path has always been clear. The but the thing is this, You can have a path, but if you don't do, how far are you ever going to get on that path? You must do. You must persevere. You must pay attention to what's around you. You must see what works, what doesn't work. And then what I do is if this isn't working, I try something else. I go over here, I go over there. That's what I do. So the first thing is you have to do, you have to persevere. And it's always amazing to me that everybody will say the three words, follow the money. They all say that. They all say the government is corrupt. Okay, so don't tell me what I know. Don't tell me what I already know. I want you to look at me, to look at Patrick, to look at the new untouchables. Look at these people who you don't know. Look at them and see what they are doing to solve the problem that you are just telling me about. You don't have to keep telling me about the problem. I know what the problem is. You know what the problem is. But you can't solve the problem unless you have the ways to stop the frickin' problem. So what the hell are you doing? You're just dilly doing around?
I like that. I like that. It's great and for orientation's sake, and I think that's a great way to start the dialogue, especially as we're turning towards the new year. Because look, the problem, the tumor, my friends, is corruption. Okay, and we know how
And
to.
it ain't just fat fuck Donald Trump.
Okay,
It's not only him.
right.
Don't forget that.
That's well, we're going to discuss that, and what we're going to also discuss is the fact that as I frequently cite in these truth bombs, is that, in this effort where I was an island to myself until you came along and helped me, spread the gospel. And we picked up a lot of people along the way, really good meaning people, very thoughtful, in the most cases, very, I'd say, shall we say, what's the word I'm looking for when you've been around the block? Accomplished people to a degree, right? And very intuitive people, and they know things, But what shocks me a lot of the times too is how, shall we say, capable they are, what they still don't get. And I think that is part and parcel to how much information we get on a daily basis. And I always describe it as the four walls of our existence because we all have lives to live. We all do what we do. And I want to use this as kind of my orientation first before I get into the next part of this that I want to take us down this path to demonstrate what I'm talking about. But to Roseanne's um, metaphor in what she laid out, and I thought it was great. We are the black box of how the system crashed and how it works. Okay. We have all the answers. And there is no question we are probably the seminal, most, uh, shall we say, qualified experts in the country on corruption. Because we
And we're not saying that. Patrick doesn't say that, and I don't say that because we think, my word, we don't think we're the big cheese. We don't, we have learned. Have we not learned from the best, from the most qualified
and
who
how did we
solve
how did we
problems?
how did we do that?
You did that by making the con, by
Right.
going on a
Because I
14-year
had
journey.
millions of dollars and I put thousands and thousands of hours, and it wasn't just me. I worked with literally over the course of years hundreds of people. Okay. So I'm just the deliverer of this information, but I want to use this as sort of the construct first, because we need thinking people more than anything, right? And many people throughout the centuries had observed birds flying, and many people decided to try to fly over the years. I've always been fond of watching these old videos from like maybe I can't remember exactly the date of when film came into being, but people attempting to try to fly, right? And they create some concoction and some Rube Goldberg contraption where they try to ride a bike and then have a flapping wings and they try to sail off a bridge and they just tank, right? It's the process. The scientific method is the process of discovery, of learning how things work, and we didn't just boom suddenly fly. It
Right.
took centuries and centuries of thinking and a whole lot of things to come together to finally be able to provide the opportunity for the Wright brothers to pull off what they did in Kitty Hawk. And then, of course, once that happened, game on. And it wasn't really in the grand scheme of things that much longer in the timeline when we had an Apollo or a Saturn V, rocket that was like what 35 stories high, taking three astronauts to the moon. I mean, the miracle of all of those things were the result of just thought, vision, getting in the method, and then figuring it all out, and then obviously smarter minds being able to figure out the physics and all of those things that are required to be able to create that reality. It's amazing. What we're doing isn't rocket science, it's racketeering, and it did take a lot of effort and a lot of information to understand ultimately. And Roseanne comes a really good place about this because she's always intuitively known about corruption just from her own observations. And I'll let her tell her story again here in just a moment. But what I'm trying to also articulate is that Roseanne was a teacher. She had been around the block. She had worked like crazy. She worked in law firms. She worked in city halls. She's been around. She's seen power. She knows how budgets work. And then she's been, in systems, but she's also dedicated her life to helping people who've fallen on hard times out of the system, to where she sees the consequences of all of these horrible things. And her whole soul has been committed to a society of vibrancy, where people are healthy, where people can live their fulfilled lives, where they don't have to suffer, I think is really her ultimate sort of baseline. And I deeply, deeply appreciate that in her actions every single day. I'm a guy about achievement. I'm about dynamism. I'm about making your way in this world because of that idea of the thought of flight. If I have a vision in my head and I see that I want to be someplace, I tend to try to figure out the methodology of trying to be there. Now, we're both not young. Roseanne Rabiola looks like she's, much younger than she is. She's 76 years old. I'm 57 years old. I go snowboard and skateboard all the time. I wear punk rock t-shirts back to my days, and so I still feel young. And like we both say, that when you have the truth, you're bulletproof, or in Roseanne's case, when you have the truth, you're drinking from the fountain of youth. But there's still too much compositely cloudy distraction, disorientation, confusion, and all about just short term memory, to where people can't retain the information that is necessary to galvanize and organize a civil rights like movement to the tens of millions of people that are A, requisite to corruption, but B, are necessary to be able to overcome that which we've become at this very moment. Okay, and I'm going to give everybody, I'm going to give you a moment to respond to what I'm saying, but then I want to share my screen to demonstrate a lot of what I'm seeing. So, kind of respond to some of the things that I just mentioned, Roseanne.
And what I think about, first of all, is no matter what's going on around you, no matter what's coming at you, no matter what the roadblocks, or one of the songs that popped up on my playlist today was There ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from doing what I'm doing. Okay. When I hurt, when I when I don't have the strength, when I have the pains and I can't do what I did 25 years ago, although I'm still pretty good at it. I find other ways. And that to me is simply clearing clearing the path. It's clearing the path. It's pushing all those other things to the side because what is most important? Two things, the planet and the people. If we don't have the planet, what the hell are the people going to do? Okay. I'm not seeing on social media who's worrying about the planet burning up? Who's worrying about floods and storms and earthquakes? And that's the natural stuff. And then add to that all the, I'm going to call it unnatural stuff that the people with the power and the money who want to keep the power and the money do to destroy this planet. What do? They just keep destroying. Okay. So, you know what? Let 17 of them go live in a fucking bubble someplace. I don't care. I don't care. Because you know what? Nothing's impossible. Nothing is impossible. It's not. So, you either take 10 minutes a day and focus and learn some things, or you know what? Bye. Bye. Okay? Because I'm working for everybody. No matter what you're doing, no matter what you're paying attention to, that's fine. But I don't care what label you wear, what issue you want to solve. Look, we've got we've got hundreds of years of collective experience with what Patrick's got, what I have, what the new untouchables have, what all that material Patrick has. We've got hundreds, thousands of years of experience. You want to take advantage? Come on. Come on. It's easy. It's easy. Show your screen.
Well, I love it. Yeah, because see, so far I don't know how many minutes we're into this. I'm just going to check.
We're almost 20. Almost 20.
20. And if I'm a viewer out there with a short attention span, I'm going to be like, what are you guys talking about? I heard corruption once. I heard black box. I heard that anything's possible. And by the way, I love that because enthusiasm. My friend Floyd, who I call Floydo, he's literally a poet. He taught me recently that enthusiasm is the nostrils or the breath of God, right? So it's like, yeah, without enthusiasm, it's really impossible to get anything done because
Right.
you have to have the drive and the willpower. But to do what? Listen, she, Roseanne did say what everybody knows. They all know that follow the money. They all know the system is corrupt. Okay, now what? All right, so let's take a look here, right? So I'm going to share my screen and I'm just going to give everybody just a taste of what I have to endure every day. And it really pisses me off because it's just so stupid. All right. So, first and foremost, here's a lovely AOC who millions of people adore, and they think she's going to be the person that's going to lead us out of this wreckage. I'll remind people that I'm being a little bit sarcastic. I like AOC. I think she's a lovely person. I think she does say some really good stuff, but she also knows her place in the system, and she's basically not a leader that knows how to defeat corruption, and neither does the entire systemology of her and Bernie Sanders because they've been at it for a long time, meaning Bernie, and he hasn't been able to change it yet. I'll use that as proof positive element one. But let's just take a look at this. AOC, she says it's not, well, whether or not she says this could have been computer generated. It could have been her team who does social media. Who knows, right? But here's a picture of her in front of the press mics. Here's Sky. I have no idea who Simply Sky is. I'm not going to take the time to try to find out. But she says it's not just that Trump is corrupt, it's that everyone participating in this is corrupt. Elon is corrupt. Jeff Bezos is corrupt. Mark Zuckerberg is corrupt. That's got 1.5 thousand likes, 413 shares, 60 comments. Okay. What did she just say to you?
And I responded to that somebody reposted. Okay. And I posted the meme that we put together about the global oligarchs. All right. You can't, she's absolutely right that here's corruption, but we've got this whole barrel. Okay, let's take the world as a barrel. It's a barrel of rotten apples. If you take out a couple of rotten apples, what do you got? You still got a hell of a lot of rot, don't you? Do you not? Do you not?
Am I
The
supposed to
bear,
say yes? We have a lot of rot.
yeah, the barrel has to be filled with people of integrity and courage and experience who know what to do so that we don't continue to breed rot.
Okay, now that sounded like a lot of really good information in a metaphorical sense, but what I might say is that Elon is the world's richest man. Jeff Bezos is probably top three. Mark Zuckerberg is probably top 4 or 5. I know there's a few of them that are in there that were left out. Okay, but what she's saying is the billionaires are corrupt. Okay, and they have different sorts of methodologies of being corrupt because Jeff Bezos is a hedge fund guy that created the world's largest online, marketplace. Obviously, Zuckerberg is social media, and Elon is some manner, shape, or form of course, all things Tesla, SpaceX, which includes a lot of other information regarding government, contracts and also subsidies and all of those other sorts of things.
Welfare queen.
Well, and that's interesting because then I'll go here because then this guy, Ron Filipowski, right? Filipkowski, who I think is a real person, but I think just the frequency that his stuff pops up on my feed is ridiculous. Either has a team or however that works out, or he's just a fake person. But it says, I've seen thousands of posts about welfare fraud from right wingers on social media, which should be prosecuted if people committed crimes, but zero posts about dozens of wealthy, rich fraudsters who stole billions from thousands of people who have been pardoned by Trump. Guess what? Well, what would you respond to that? Both of those, actually.
Look, there he can say what he's saying, but nobody's talking about the millions of people who were illegally foreclosed upon, who lost their pensions, bazillions of trillions of dollars, okay? And trillions of dollars were given illegally to fraudulent people, to financial terrorists. We ask the question all the time. Do you know what the $71 trillion truth is? You can't just look at the ones who were pardoned by Trump. That's part of it. You've got to get to the root. You've got to get to the
You
root.
absolutely nailed that, and thank you for saying it because I'm so happy that you did because that's the point. This guy, they stole billions? No, they got trillions illegally over the course of 14 years through three presidencies. So what are you going to do, Ron? What are you going to do, AOC? AOC, who said what last summer, and I went to all of her, staffers and people who were kind of her protectors, I suspect, on social media, when she said on the floor of the House that RICO is not a crime. And then they were like, well, they were saying that you've got to prove the predicate acts and this and that. And I'm like, shut up. RICO is the mother of all crimes. And here is a congresswoman who's basically being groomed to run for president who doesn't know how to describe that. They're both, and all of these are examples of just furthering and muddying the waters. Okay. And this is the purpose of social media. I'm going to continue down this pathway because further on this feed, and I could just go, all day on this, and it's going to, I mean, this is just the whole purpose. And this is the good guys, right? On Blue Sky compared to X and compared to Facebook and compared to Instagram. I mean, you can at least get some good stuff here, but for the most part, it's inundated by algorithms. It's inundated by fake accounts. It's inundated by accounts that are paid by the DNC or whomever else. And there's ways that, they amplify or de-amplify, and there's just tricks to the trade that you've learned that you got to play other people's games. Meanwhile, everybody's asking about corruption or making a statement about corruption without understanding what the corruption is or what to do about it. So this person says, doesn't it strike you as strange that the people shout long and loud that America is a Christian nation founded on Christian principles are the very people who don't want Christ's teaching and tolerance, pacifism, and generosity codified by the law? So in a generic sense, it's a person reminding during the holidays, hey, look, man, if you are a Christian, these were the principles of Christ, and you are just the opposite. Okay, great, because that ultimately, is something that we'll see a lot on Blue Sky. But I always call it the triad. It's Tetron, the dark Tetron that we've seen with MAGA is it's white supremacy, it's a patriarchy through kind of the religious fundamentalism of what is the ultimate organizing power behind money, and it's a theocracy, right? And so that's the way you control people in that society, and you can organize them into a voting bloc, which became MAGA, to allow criminals and pedophiles and corrupt con artists to completely control our system. But
Yeah.
it's not just one guy. A lot of people in the Democratic Party want to say it's all about Trump at this stage of the game, or they want to say, let's get rid of Trump and we're going to solve, and then we'll deal with everything else later. No, you won't. The reason we have this problem is because we didn't deal with this problem, and that's what we've been doing
When
the whole time. Okay, and so I'll keep going forward here just for a couple of other demonstrations. You always get the cute type of things and random stuff, but depending on what's trending, and mostly sports was trending today. There's some stuff on Ukraine, but here's another one. Like this guy Darren 32359. I have no idea who Darren is. I haven't spent a lot of time looking into it, but I think it's a fake account. And it's just, look, 49,000 following, 37 followers, right? And this is just, okay, it gets these messages out there. The men in the girls' bathrooms crowd doesn't seem to care about grown man admitting he walked into a dressing room filled with naked, half naked 14 and 15-year-old girls. Okay, good point, right? Yeah, we know Trump is a protector of pedophiles and it has been, but he got elected. Okay, and you know what? We've known this for a long time. So to demonstrate it, and look, 823 people like that, 375 shared it, 46 made because there's something that is just this reaction, right? It's this guttural sort of, oh my God, that disgusts me. I hate it. And so, it's safe for people to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I agree with that. I'll share that. All right, great. But what does it do? It doesn't do anything except for make the people who already hate Trump hate him more. And, there's something to that, and that's good. But if it's not galvanized behind a movement that it can actually purge the corruption that created Trump, good luck. Now, a lot of people love Robert Reich, right? Robert Reich says the grasshopper gets it, divide and conquer. Today's robber barons use the same playbook, but together we have the power. Watch. So he does this Disney film, and I like the film. I saw it a long time ago with my son when he was a kid. But here's Robert Reich, a guy who was the former labor secretary under Bill Clinton. He's been, one of the key go-tos. He's a professor at Berkeley, and he talks about the disparity of wealth and this, that, and the other. But I can tell you that Robert Reich has sat on the sidelines not endeavoring what Roseanne just told you the entire time, which means that he's either stupid or he's a liar. Which do you think it is, Roseanne?
He's not stupid.
Okay. So there's a reason why people lie on all sides of the fence, do they not? Why do people typically lie? Especially if they're accomplished people. To
They
protect,
don't want to show, they don't want to show their hand.
they don't want
That's
to,
what I
they're
think.
protecting their position. They're protecting how they're getting paid. They played in a situation, like I told you, he works at University of Berkeley, which like Harvard gets, billions and billions of research from the federal government. He plays a role. He's a personality. He's amplified. I doubt he posts most of what he does. I think he has a team. He probably oversees it, yada, yada, yada. I've met Robert Reich in the past. I've talked to Robert Reich in the past, to be honest with you. And I can tell you right now that he has never once said that the Democrats under Obama circled the wagons to protect Wall Street in the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history because they made a choice to float the economic system of the world rather than take out the bad guys. That was a Faustian bargain that led to what we're in the midst of. Why? Because when you give the system that just raped and pillaged hundreds of millions of people tens of trillions of dollars illegally, what do you think that's going to do to the likes of the real criminals who know how things work? They're going to be like, oh, the law isn't the law.
Yeah.
We're going to get our piece. And that's exactly is what has created Trump in this MAGA zombie apocalypse. Here's one, and I'll finish with this. Yet another failed redacted allegation. Epstein also instructed one or more Epstein enterprise participant witness to destroy evidence relevant to ongoing court proceedings involving defendants' criminal sex trafficking and abuse conduct. Rather than being, I mean, other than being a run-on sentence, I'm not sure exactly what that said, but the point is DOJ and Epstein. Like this person, Clara Torres Spellacy, however you pronounce her name, if she's real or fake. Most people have these fake accounts that express something, or they're actually fake, depending on who they are. And she's talking about, okay, because it trends a lot and a lot of people are checking it out. Epstein, 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 right? But A, they don't even know how the money worked with Epstein. B, they don't know what Epstein was tied into and why. And C, it's like this revelation of names in the Epstein files is somehow going to solve how a bunch of rich people were able to be above the law and be insanely criminal in a predation on minors and that sort of thing. It's a salacious sort of it's a reaction to the disgusting behavior. But the real question, of course, as I just laid out, is why is this incredible cabal of incredibly connected people above the law? Well, for people who think that the rape of young women was where this thing began and ended, they have no idea that it's connected to the $71 trillion revelation that we're providing you. And maybe that's just too much for most people to understand, but I know that 3.5% of us can easily get this if we can just reach them. And I'm going to just do another example here real quick, and I'm going to get your thoughts here, Roseanne. But I wanted to I shared the New York Times a lot when we do these screen shares, and the reason I do that is one, I've got a subscription to the New York Times, but the New York Times is the paper of record. They've got incredible resources. They have incredibly competent professional journalists. They tend to tell the stories of things that are happening in the moment, whether it's wartime or some sort of natural disaster, gun shooting, probably as well as anybody in the country. And a lot of other mainstream media follow their cues from what the New York Times is revealing, and it sets the tonality for the entire country of how we're revealing things or responding to things. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, take a look at this. I was just so naive, right? And this is inside Marjorie Taylor Greene's break with Trump, okay? And then it says four takeaways from our profile with Greene. I'm just going to ask you this question first, Roseanne. Why do you think the New York Times is taking up its valuable real estate on the front page of the paper to describe how a woman who was uber MAGA is now somehow, basically painted as being naive? What are you supposed to respond to that? And what is your feeling about that headline?
I saw it the first thing this morning, and I thought, yeah, another division, another way to take up space, to draw people's attention from the truth and give them, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Um, wasn't she with those MAGAs? Now the Democrats are saying, see, look, we were we were right. Okay. It's another distraction.
Well,
That's
can I offer this, please? It's an
uh,
exploitation. It's exploiting a fracture within MAGA to try to weaken Trump and the MAGA base. That's what it's trying to do. Now, meanwhile, the most important question about Marjorie Taylor Greene is how she came into office worth $700,000 and 6 years later is
yeah.
leaving with $27 million.
How does that happen?
There's no mention of that in this article, just so you know. So is the Times interested in revealing corruption, or are they more interested in revealing some sort of fracture within, the Republican base because they don't like Trump?
They're not interested in getting to the heart of the matter. That's all I have to say. They don't care about the root of the problem.
They're not concerned with corruption. Okay,
Right.
why did I make the con?
Because you wanted to find out what caused the illegal foreclosure on your home.
I didn't know
Everything
that at
wasn't
the time.
making sense. Nothing was making sense. Okay. How could this happen? How could it happen? Even,
Let me respond to this, and I'm sorry because you're going in the right direction, but there's a faster way to get there. The bottom line was I had experienced something that mainstream media was telling a story that didn't align with what it was that I was actually
that's
experiencing.
right.
And I was like, wait a second. So that was my first question. And it just so happened I was a producer and I studied political science and I studied journalism. So I knew how to ask questions and I knew how to put projects together. So I did. Again, when people look at me as a sort of source for information, what you need to understand is I didn't come out of nowhere. I'm not speaking in platitudes. I'm not speaking in
Right.
hyperbole. I'm speaking first person from being able to spend, because I was able to realize millions of dollars that required tens of thousands of effort, hours of effort to go around this country it's probably 9 times really throughout the making of the kind to be able to aggregate all of the information that the federal government did not do on behalf of the American people, and same with media. They all hid this. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, that sounds like Epstein, or you might be saying to yourself, no, that's impossible. Well, just look at Epstein. They sat on the information of all things
Right.
Epstein, and we still don't have the information.
Right.
If you watch my truth bombs, you know that I interact with the director of investigations for the New York Times by the name of David Enrich, and I've interviewed him 4 times for different books. And I know David Enrich personally. And the last interview that I did with him was based on all things Epstein's financial relationship with JP Morgan Chase. And I asked him point blank, it's 2025, David. Why is this information now on the front page of the New York Times? And he really had kind of a befuddling answer to that. I'm not questioning his ambition, his process, his talent, which is incredible. They're the best of the best. What I'm questioning is why now? This was every bit as relevant in 2019 when Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide.
Yeah.
But all of the other things that were relevant were just as relevant in 2008 in the New York Times with its incredible array of resources could easily have asked the same questions and made the same discovery in 2008. But here's the most important thing. I asked him, and he did get a little bit stymied because he was like, oh, wait, you're probably right. I was like, Hey, David, maybe Chase and everybody else was just dealing with the 2008 great financial crisis, which we both know was monumentally bigger than Epstein. So maybe that's the reason why a lot of these things weren't addressed by way of the suspicious activity reports and some of these other things. And he was like, you got a point, you know? But the bottom line is the Department of Justice is so big, the FBI is so big that it could do anything it wanted and it could handle a whole lot of situations at the same time. They chose not to. And so I'll just make this final point on the New York Times and then we'll move forward. So this was an interesting headline down here on the right. It says, Why We Fall for Narcissistic Leaders Starting in Grade School. I got to be honest with you, and you've probably heard this more times than you can count. Everything I ever needed to learn, I learned on the schoolyard by the time I was in sixth grade. How people behave and ultimately what you have to do in the moment. And I always had, I don't know, a sort of joy challenging bullies, quite frankly. I never conformed. I never bowed to some dude in some group of guys that were, bullying everybody else. I tended to throw sand in their face and I had fun doing it. That's ultimately my DNA. And that's why I've been able to become a muckraking journalist. And that's exactly what I am. But I found that interesting right here. So I'm going to finish with that. And then I'm going to ask for your response to the stuff that we've just rolled through.
Oh, don't look up. Yeah. I said a couple of things to people in some phone conversations yesterday. And one of them, and it really sparked something in her head. And that was because we were talking about why her newspaper, online newspaper, um, isn't getting traction, doesn't have sponsors and things like that. And I said, this is what Patrick and I say all the time. We're making the plane and flying, we're building the plane and flying it at the same time. And she goes, oh my God. And then I said, do you have any people on your staff, and none of them are paid, do you have any people who can devote at least 6 to 8 hours a day doing what I do and what you do on social media? And she says, no. I says, well, again, I'm going to always go back to the do. Like you learned on the playground from the bullies. I had to stand up to a bully one time, and it was the only time in my life that I threw a punch. And as I threw that punch, that bully moved the other way, and I cut my knuckles across here, okay? And I'm bleeding. Well, when the bully saw the bleeding, the bully took off. And I never had to throw a punch again. What my throwing, okay, my
I love to hear that.
my throwing punches is doing and showing people through my actions what I am all about. And in this state of Nevada, I know tons and tons of people. I consider this, this is a small pond. Nevada is a small pond, and it's very easy to get connected to the movers and the shakers. I interviewed Harry Reid, who was, Mr. Wonderful in the Senate for how long? Okay. I interviewed him 3 times. And as I tell people, when you're interviewing Harry Reid, you have to look at his mouth to understand that he stopped talking. He was so boring. He was. But I will tell you, I got Harry the last time I interviewed Harry Reid, I got him to like perk up. And I was talking about his hometown of Searchlight. Searchlight has a couple of hundred residents. And when I start talking about Searchlight, he just lit up, and he left the interview with saying, "You know, Roseanne," he says, the two of us should go out on the street and do man on the street interviews." And I said, "Gee, Senator, that would be great." And then, you know, he became he became Chuck Schumer, and
Good point.
he never allowed me to interview him again. That was the end of that. And, you know,
Yeah, and you got another situation with Catherine Cortez Masto because she was the head.
oh,
She's your senator, but she was also the lead
she
fundraiser for
was
PNC.
okay. And she was, when she was Attorney General, I had her on my show, I don't know how many times to speak. Okay. She,
Interesting.
she and I have met lots of times. And you know what? She had a uh chief of staff in a local office, and he didn't know who Michael Callahan was. Anybody who lives in Nevada who didn't know who Big Mike was, he was the governor of Nevada. He was Harry Reid's mentor. He was his mentor. Okay. Everything is so close in Nevada. You have to know all of this. But when you're a 20 something and all you know is how to follow the algorithms and do all the stuff on social media, and you don't know what I've had in my heart and in my mind since I've been about 10 years old and understand how the party works.
Right.
And when you don't understand that,
Preach,
big,
sister. Like, and that's another reason why you're so valuable because experience matters, quite frankly. So, to that point, a couple of small just anecdotes to that. It's interesting. Harry Reid, in addition to being, I always kind of found it fun his initiative on some of the UFO type stuff, just as a sidebar. But ultimately, Harry was a good, as you mentioned with Schumer, he was always in the money. All right, and I know firsthand of certain stories about his being involved with payday lenders and all sorts of big groups in states in the West, from California, Nevada, and Utah, and Colorado, and things that he was involved with that, I mean, may as well be organized crime, to be honest with you. And he, like a lot of folks in Nevada, which are interesting too, he's Mr. LDS guy, right? And LDS guys in Nevada have had a long-standing relationship with those who built Las Vegas, right? And there's always been that sort of connectivity. And by the way, I'll even further that Mitt Romney, I don't want to go into details about that, but it's interesting that you brought that up because, yes, when you understand, okay, in Nevada, what do the casinos need? How does the whole thing structure? How does the state work? How's the state run? What's the money? Who's the gatekeepers? How do they work in confluence with all of the other things? Then you understand the paradigm, okay? That's what we understand about the nation. That's what we understand about our financial system, our legal system, the entire system of government, but also now, probably more than ever before, media. And what we're here to tell you is they're all lying to you. They're all pissing on your head, telling you it's rain, whether it's mainstream, whether it's social media. You have been completely bamboozled. You have been tricked. You've been deceived. And yet there's so many people out there that are going to put their full faith and credit and stock and trade into sorts of, let's say vectors of people they trust, right? And we're seeing this rift in the Democratic Party right now. because there should be a giant rift. But the rift is not between anti-corruption and the corrupt. It's make believe anti corruption in the face of a multicultural sort of expression of Zoran Mondani that is a social democrat that's going to be able to, do what? Get, I don't know, what throughout the country. If you're going to use Zoran, for example, as a baseline, okay, he's going to get, assistance for family,
Affordable housing, health,
housing and housekeeping.
transit,
Right, right.
daycare.
And he's going to be able to do this and that, but he's not really, because the way City Hall works in New York City with all of the influence of the big money and everything else, and we saw with Eric Adams, and before, Gotham is Gotham. My God, that is Tammany Hall. There's a way things work, and it is nice to see Zoran. He's very dynamic. He's very astute. At the same time, he didn't come out of nowhere. He was born into a structure of an intellectual, academic socialism construct in Manhattan that's been there forever. It's mostly the academics. In New York, there's the financial system, there's the service industry, there's the real estate industry, and there's, quite frankly, the academics. Industry left a long time ago, right? So that there was an infrastructure in Bernie Sanders that made that all possible. What we're trying to tell you is that as we turn into the new year, nobody has a plan with the information and the details that can shatter the illusion of what everybody is in the midst of. That they're all manipulating you, whether it's some fake online account that says, hey, it's all about corruption, the billionaires are corrupt, so on and so forth. Okay, who did what, when, and how? How does this thing work? And how do you turn the tables on it if you believe in liberty and justice for all, one person, one vote, a country that is a superpower, that has the academic capacity and the financial capacity as a superpower to basically achieve anything at once? And that's all dissipating quickly because we have a resident buffoon, idiot, con artist, clown driving the ship. But for anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is a mastermind, first of all, you wouldn't be paying attention to us this long in the first place.
Right.
But if anybody ever wants to think, if we get rid of Trump, which we have to do, but if we get rid of Trump, then all of a sudden, problem solved.
No.
That is the dumbest thing you could ever
Right.
possibly think of.
Right.
Donald Trump wasn't the mastermind of the J6 insurrection.
Right.
Donald Trump wasn't the mastermind of his rise. He was a transactional pig that has been involved with corruption as a useful idiot for now decades.
What did he learn from Roy Cohn? What did he learn?
Lie,
Never.
baby. Never admit anything, and lie
That's right.
switch the blame and implicate first and foremost. But what do we know about Roy Cohn? That guy was deep in the bowels of depravity because he himself was a homosexual, as an anti-homosexual, and all of those sorts of strange goings on. But he's an elixir of this guy that knows how to move money, that hides things, and knows how to, get involved with people. Let's just say A.K. Epstein. Okay, so Roy Cohn, Epstein, they're all kind of part of the same mishigas, if you want to know the truth. And it's very effective and it's very important. It's very insightful to understand how those things work. But they are a part of the apparatus, of the tool, of the machinery that we are revealing to you in the Clean New Deal, right? The cleannewdeal.org. And now we're going to load into the final piece of this. So thank you for tuning in so far. And I want to address one of the folks who've been listening to us on our YouTube channel for a long time, Roseanne. And I'm not going to mention her name because she watches frequently, and I know she'll be watching this as well. But she made a comment on one of our recent truth bombs, and she was disappointed in the details of the Clean New Deal. And I thought to myself, and she's a librarian, by the way, and I thought to myself, why would she be disappointed? And the only thought that came to mind, and this is for the folks that are all about the details of, let's say, Medicare for all, the details of, I don't know, some intrinsic plan that, has been in the making for a very long time, that people know the details and the minutia, and they want to make that sort of central to a, let's say, response to all things MAGA, right? Now, what I'll say to her, and I'll say to everybody else out there, first and foremost, I want you to watch, and I'm going to share the screen here, because it is very important. We had a wonderful interview with David Sirota, and it was important for me to interrupt him. But it was Truth Bomb episode 51, and he reveals and confronts the toxic grip of corruption, what must be done. And what we talked about in that is his latest book, which is called, in fact, I should show it right here, Master Plan. And it's really, it picks up the whole sort of treatise, if you will, of the former Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, who came out of the tobacco industry, which we learned was one of the greatest attorneys, quite frankly, corporate attorneys in the history of the United States. And these guys are diabolical and genius and deviant, and they know exactly how the system works. And they know exactly how to get their way. And that's why they end up going to Harvard Law. That's why they get these, like, PhDs. And they know and they get to those levels because they're incredibly valuable to corporations that want to circumvent the law, be able to basically create corruption so they can get legislatures to write laws on their behalf so they can steal more money while killing more people in the case of the tobacco industry. Same goes for all of these other fossil fuel industries that Trump's in the mix of. And I say that because, again, people, if you don't understand the paradigms of power, and there's a lot of different freaking elements of our economy. We are a huge economy. When you're an investor, you tend to diversify. You want to be in some finance. You want to be in some energy. You want to be in some retail. You want to be in some whatever the other technology, right? That's how you ensure your calculated risk if you want to invest and live off of your earnings. Most people work, they save money, they invest money, they use that investment capital to pay for their retirement. That's pretty much the American way. But what we've done for the course of really now 40 years, if we've provided, and this goes back to, I say 40 years, it's funny because it's really our entire history, quite frankly. From the landowners, if you think about it, all the way through the robber barons, there's always been a system of power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as we know through history, right, Roseanne? And so what we've done is we've created the Clean New Deal. And the reason we've created the Clean New Deal is because we understand all the technical minutia of literally everything that's happened for the past 40 years. But most importantly is what happened in the 2008 great financial crisis. Because the 2008 great financial crisis got tens of millions of people ensnared in the largest criminal racketeering enterprise in the history of the world, but that never ended. There is a paradigm of how things work in commodities and in terms of selling securities. Doesn't matter what the product is, but in the 2008 great financial crisis, it was homes. Homes by far constitute the largest single commodity category in the entire economy. Why? Homes are expensive. There are ways that homes are created to create value and so on and so forth based on the different neighborhoods. And there's all sorts of criteria. There's all ways to get people involved. There's a history that, created hybrid private public interest and what we call Fannie and Freddie to be able to create this incubator to allow banks to be able to loan more money to more people to be able to grow the economy, which is a great thing. If and only if, A, you have an economy that creates the income requisite what the housing would be, and there's all sorts of formulations and calculus for this along the way. And so by the time we got to the 2008 great financial crisis, and this is why I had to make the con, we revealed the blueprint for how what we were taught by William K. Black, who was the Michael Jordan of criminology in the United States, who was the former general counsel of what was called the Office of Thrift Supervision that regulated this industry. And he and his team with Ed Gray put together an investigation. And by the way, in 1984, 5, 7, somewhere in that vicinity, his budget was $100 million. Okay? Put that into 2020, 25 money. I always say that twice. How much money? I don't know what the rate of inflation is, but it would be a substantial number, don't you think?
A lot of money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
$100 million is a lot of
Yeah.
money. But what they figured out with a relatively, bare bones group of people, but they were legal geniuses. They figured out exactly what the CEOs of all of these banks and these thrifts and savings and loan were doing because of it's always based on incentives, people. How do people get paid, especially in a hierarchy of an organization? Banks get paid by making loans. In capitalism, banks get paid by making loans based on calculated risk. And if you win, you can win big, but you can also manipulate and lie.
Manipulate the system, baby.
Can you not? Can you not? And you okay? So let me get your comment on that because you've been around the block a bunch of times, Roseanne. Tell me what happens if you have perverse incentives for very diabolical and brilliant, ambitious people.
Look, when you know if you follow the lead of the guys knocking on your door telling you you will vote for these guys, you know you follow them, you're going to get a job, you're going to get this, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Because it's guaranteed. The minute you buck the system, like I did, what did they do when I put up a candidate? What did they do? Let's burn down their campaign office. Okay. So when that happens, what do? I go different ways. All right.
Why is
I
that out of curiosity? What about you makes you buck the system and become a nonconformist?
I don't know. I don't like people saying you can't do this or you can't do that. Even when I was a little kid, I'd say, "Oh, I want to do this. Let's do a show over here. Let's do a lemonade stand. Let's do
Okay, so
something."
you're just kind of anti-establishment.
Oh, yeah.
You're an outlaw in your own right, and I've grown to know you so well, and I know you're a bit of a gambler too, and you've got all those like wonderful characteristics of, people that get through the system, but you also have this deep, deep rooted commitment to caring and empathy towards people that fall on hard times. Where does that come from?
That comes from Chuck Rabiola, my father. That's where that comes from. And that went to him through his mother. Because my grandfather, Chuck Rabiola Sr., I never had a conversation with the man. He was mean. He I got to tell you this story. He gets on the bus. He's doing the shopping and he goes down to Taylor Street to get the groceries. And they live on the north side. So he gets on the bus. He's got packages and shopping bags and he's got a transfer. You know what a transfer is?
For the
Like
subway or the L?
it's a piece of paper, the piece of paper and you give it to the driver.
Okay.
Okay, my grandfather has the a transfer in his mouth because he couldn't carry it in his hands. And he goes up to the driver, like for the driver to take it. Driver wouldn't take it. My grandfather puts down the bags, takes a big can of tomatoes, and whacks the driver.
Oh wow.
Okay. My grandfather was like you. He was like the brawler. Okay. But he wasn't like this caring, loving person. Okay. He was the total opposite of my grandmother. And I don't know how they ever got together. But what I got from her, and she died when I was like 5 years old. I remember her so clearly. I remember the taste of her spaghetti sauce.
Right on.
That's how much I remember Antoinette Rabiola. Okay. So from these two people, my grandmother and my father, I get this, hey man, you got to help people. Everybody loved my grandmother. They loved my father. Maybe it was a thing that I wanted people to like me or love me. Okay. But I can tell you, when I do stuff for people, I do it because I want to and because of what I get back. And I can't understand any of these no good, rotten, pig, moron, lobotomized zombies doing what they're doing.
Well, selfishness is a really, you remember, like one of the biggest influences in my life was Oliver Stone's Wall Street. And Gordon Gekko says in that, the whole premise was greed is good. Selfishness is what drives the American economy. What we didn't know at that time was there's a big difference between, okay, I'm going to be up at 4 a.m. I'm going to be the first person in the office. I'm going to be the last person to leave, and I'm going to do my homework all night because I'm studying all the fluctuations of everything that's going to make my operation better. That's not what they're doing. They're trading on insider information. They're lying, stealing, and cheating, and they're pocketing fees where people don't know how the elixir is working in the black box. Okay.
Right.
And so what happens is you get people who've got short attention span, especially in this age of, all things social media. And I love what you just said about culture, right? Because what we're trying to do here is effectively create a culture. Because there once was a culture in the United States, in the neighborhoods like where Roseanne is from, where the Italian culture was obviously paramount, but it could go a bunch of different ways, couldn't it, Roseanne? You have the family, you have the commitment, you have character, and you have ethics and all of those things. And we've seen that characterized, throughout in wonderful films and books and everything else. I think of Upton Sinclair and the jungle and all of those types of periods where people think about what's right and what's fair. And that's, I think, really the nature or the notion of the United States from the very beginning is there's got to be a degree of fairness, is the idea baked into the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, what we've seen, and this is what they all said from the very beginning, it's a great system if you can keep it. And they were all, and I've learned more and more about the details and the minutia of all of the different players, that were our founding fathers and all of the elements. And to be human is to be flawed. So to try to create a purity test for what they were able to do at that time is unfair. But what the point that I'm trying to make is the culture of character. Character matters. And what I
Right.
discovered about, I don't know, I'm going to call it now 10 years ago. Maybe it was long. It was like, Jesus, it was 13 years ago. It was when I was finishing up filming on my first film and I was trying to compact all this stuff into my brain and try to create a framing. And what I came up with was there's two columns of our soul. You got character, integrity, dignity, honesty, decency, beauty against hypocrisy, duplicity, complicity, perversity. I mean, power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And conformity is what absolute power uses to get weak, ignorant cowards into their mix to do their bidding, to blame everybody else for their problems while they're raping everybody. So what did LBJ say back in the day? Say it with me. When you the,
When you
when
when
you
you
can
get
convince the lowest white man on the totem pole that he's higher on the wrong than the but
then the look, when you get a white man to believe that he is above the black man, you can pick his pocket all day.
Yeah, and it was one caveat to that. He said, if you can get the white man to understand that he's higher on the rung than the highest black man, then you can pick his pockets all day. Again, this is all deception, people. This is all it's ever been. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's deception, conformity, systems. The only thing in the history of the world that has been able to break the grip of tyranny or fascism or whatever sort of monarchy or aristocracy that you want to put in there, the only thing that's ever been able to break it is the rule of law on behalf of a society that has the fundamentals and the awareness of liberty and justice for all. I know that's a very easy construct for most of us to understand, but that's what we pledge allegiance to. But that's what we've all betrayed by falling victim to this ignorance in the situation outside of culture because we're all chasing the shiny object, right? Who says what, when, and how to be able to elicit a response to where it's like, I got to move on. I don't have any attention. I have attention deficit disorder. I don't have the ability to be able to learn, quite frankly. That's what's become of our society. And the reason I'm taking such pains throughout the 720 truth bombs and what we're talking about, which is going longer than I wanted to, but I think it's very good today, Roseanne, is for those who are still in the game here, we are teaching you who did what, when, and how, and why throughout everything that we put out there, what the entire system is lying to you about, which is everybody on your social media feed. Because if they're not telling you the information we have, they're either A, stupid, or they're lying. One of the two. And it could be a combination, quite frankly, because I know a lot of very smart people with PhDs that are the dumbest people I've ever met in my fucking life.
Right,
So,
right.
please don't hold me to a purity test. But at the same time, again, the reason why Roseanne put me on the Patrick Lovell presents the Clean New Deal, because I didn't say I want to be like a lot of people accuse me of as a self promoter, even though I'll
Yep.
take it. Okay, I'm promoting the truth, you morons. The bottom line is I'm not anybody's savior. I'm not trying to be a dictator. I am a producer and I am a liberator and I am a muckraker. I am a truth teller. I am selling truth, but I'm giving it to you for free. How ironic is that? I'm giving you the $71
True.
trillion truth that affects everything and that can change everything if and only if and when we're going to say 3.5% of you in our population fucking just turn off the noise. Stop buying lies and trust us. And if you don't trust us off the top, ask us questions. Like I
Right.
mentioned earlier, our friend that commented on our YouTube, excuse me, yeah. And she's like, look, I'm disappointed with the Clean New Deal. We're going to run through the precepts of the Clean New Deal with you right now, predicated on the four questions. But I'm going to say this caveat up front. This is an umbrella of a civil rights movement to purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. Only when you become a nuclear reaction vector to the Big Bang of truth that we're dropping. Now, for those of you who want to get into minutiaville and you want to argue and you want to wrestle and you are smart and you think you've got it all solved and you got it figured out and you have one issue, the one issue people live in silos and they're the ones who have allowed the billionaire apparatus to kick your ass. Okay? You're not organizing on a principle that's going to change the country and destroy corruption. You're not going to do it. And you're not going to get anything you want by not being able to get into a giant united front, which is not coming for the Democrats. That's not to say that people that are Democrats can't lift up the Clean New Deal. To the contrary, we are reaching out to people running for
Perfect.
elections and the midterms at all levels, at every part of the political situation, if they prop up the Clean New Deal to merge what it is that they are, and that meaning what their campaign represents. Why? Because again, people, I went to both Bernie Sanders, fight the oligarchy tour. I know exactly what they want to do. They want to create a workers led coalition that needs work, that basically needs to solidify the working class so the working class can provide for its family. Very important, okay? But without defining the corruption, you cannot negotiate in good faith with CEOs that have been getting tens of trillions of dollars illegally
Illegally.
for the last 14 years. Okay. This lying circus of carnage of idiots has got to end. And again, like I said, we're not geniuses. Okay. This is not even remotely rocket science. But yeah, it probably helps if you've been around the block and you got a college education and you think about things and you understand history and everything else. But you don't have to understand everything with incredible detail to
No.
be able to get. Have you heard of this guy, Patrick Lovell and Roseanne Rabiola Mille? They've got this thing called the Clean New Deal, and it's coming from this work in the con that reveals what everybody is lying to us about. And if you can turn on that light bulb, everything else becomes clear, does it not? Did
You
it?
gotta
Did
do.
it?
You gotta do. Turn it on. That's all. That's all.
Tell us the story while I'm turning on the page here again. How, why this resonated with you, and why you ultimately became a crusader for the Clean New Deal?
Why it resonated with me, I saw episode one, just one episode that shows what happened to a 90-year-old black woman by the name of Addie Polk, who was going to be thrown out of her house. And she had no idea why this was going to happen. Okay. And she'd call and she'd try to figure out, calling people, what's going on? My house is paid for. And as the sheriff's coming up the door, she takes her husband Robert's gun and shoots herself 5 times because she couldn't allow herself to be out in the streets. Now,
Can I
who
ask you a
paid?
question about that real quick?
Yeah.
Just for a qualifier. Because there's a way I frame this in my mind, but did she commit suicide or was she murdered?
Oh, she's definitely was murdered because number one, the way, if you look into all the details of these mortgages that were so-called in default, she never signed the papers. She never knew what was going on. Somebody was making money off of her identity,
They stole it
off
from
of
her. They stole
who
the
she,
equity in the house.
they stole it.
Yeah.
They
Okay. So they
stole.
and we could go into all the details of how they stole it. It's called straw buying is a process, and it was going on in minority neighborhoods all over the world. But my sort of feeling about the whole thing was, if she was set up to basically at her age be evicted from a house that she actually owned, where she had nowhere to go and no one to help her, and nobody would help her, they committed her to a death sentence.
Right. And millions of others. They did to millions of others.
By the way, was it just, I don't know, like it was an accident? Was it her greed that got her in that situation?
Absolutely not.
It was
She
set up.
was, it was probably someone in her church who got all her information.
Gross, gross, gross. Yes, somebody in her church that was a kind, that knew how this was worked, that was preying on elderly people. That is the same kind of stuff that, we're looking at these predators of these fat, rich, well-connected men preying on children. That they, in this case, I mean, the analogy works brilliantly for me, even though I hate even thinking about it because it makes me feel so toxic and polluted, and it's a nightmare. And that's why the Clean New Deal is your ability to purge this toxicity, because when you have the truth, you're bulletproof. But I'll move on from there because I want to finish this up because it really is so important that you connected with her. But what you discovered, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I am going to lead you on this question. After you get through the paradox of Addie Polk and you're starting to piece all the puzzle pieces together, what did you discover as we ended up detailing what took shape with the former AG of Ohio, Mark Dan, and of course his staff, his terrific staff of people that went to work to try to solve this case?
I saw the details of how the party machine in the Democratic Party machine was able to do things, how the city could do things, how the church could do things, how everybody was all connected. I saw the details of the corruption, and that was it for me.
It wasn't just corruption, there was another key word. What did we discover that was the only place in the country and world, quite frankly, that we're able to put the law to use to indict and convict what was actually taking shape?
Who were the who were the people?
It's a law that we always say.
Oh, maybe I'm not hearing right.
No, you're not thinking right, because you know this inside and out, but that's not an insult. It's just the bottom line is that sometimes it gets hard to stay in the minutia. Look, it was racketeering. Okay.
Oh,
It was
Well,
RICO. It was, do we not show that it met all the predicate acts of racketeering, and the state AG of Ohio used the funds of taxpayers to put together an investigation to bring to justice people that were involved with this, that, as it turns out, was the entirety of our financial system, which proves what?
and listen, I knew it wasn't rocket science. I knew, yes, I'm seeing all these details, but what was it? Like my buddy Tom Murphy, who was the chief law enforcement officer to put the case together, to put the details together so that they could get the only RICO conviction in Summit County, Ohio. What does Tom say? Very simply, it's theft. He understood it was theft. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. It's theft. They're stealing from you.
The details of fraud, unlike what Hillary Rodham Clinton said during the presidential election in 2016, is that
It ain't no frickin' shenanigans.
not shenanigans. Fraud is a legal theft by deception. And in the eyes of the law, there are different degrees of fraud. That if, for example, you do the worst version of it, your company gets the death penalty, you get all of your ill gotten gains uh, clawed back, and you go to prison. Did any of that happen to all of the CEOs that were
None of them. None of them.
making billions of dollars
None of them.
on grand theft on a
Yeah.
global scale?
Yeah.
Okay, so
None of
now
them.
to the people out there that are still in the game here, where do you think Donald Trump came from? And by the way, Donald Trump's been playing this game for a long time, his entire
Well,
career. Okay.
right.
So let me just introduce a few things here in terms of what we need to understand as we close out the new year and we try to move forward to build a movement that's requisite the corruption, my friends. First, you got to understand and you got to stop misusing terms, because we're all sold a bill of goods if we don't understand how things work. First of all, I make the declaration to reboot the American dream. And yeah, if you're going to basically be like, I don't like this guy because there's never been an American dream. Okay, go sit on the sidelines and we'll take care of it. Okay, and you jump on the bandwagon when it's okay for you. Okay, we're trying to create a country and a world that allows dynamism and achievement to occur based on the rule of law and its equal application first and foremost. If you do not have the law, you have corruption. That's all there is to it. It's always been the case. It's the greatest trick the devil ever played, was to convince the world he didn't exist, which is why we have the law. But if you don't look, you don't find. And if you do what the Supreme Court has made it almost impossible to do, because they say quid pro quo is obviously illegal, but you got to prove these things. But if you've got a Department of Justice run by a corrupt AG, how are you going to do an investigation? Same goes for the FBI. You're not. That's why we had to do the con, which led to this. So ultimately, you don't live in a democracy. One democracy, a lot of the Republicans like to say, of course, we're a representative republic. Okay. Yeah,
So,
we're not a democracy, but at the same time, we all think of ourselves as a democracy, because if you really think about it, elected representatives are supposed to do what the whole state wanted to do, which is majority, but it doesn't work that way. And that's another confluence of manipulation. But democracy is one person, one vote. That's all there is to it. So you don't live in a democracy, and you, as a regular person who might be working a 9 to 5 job or in fast food or 2 jobs or 3 jobs, you're not equal to a billionaire that makes the rules. Okay. So it's bullshit. We're not a democracy. But here's the key thing for everybody who wants to make this point over and over: it's not capitalism. Capitalism is a form of the situation, but we don't have capitalism. If you want to be detailed and technical, we actually have socialism for the criminal class. And we will be able to demonstrate that to you to the ends of the earth and back. What we're trying to tell you is that in the in a system of capitalism, the notion is the law is supposed to hold companies to account if they break the law, or if they lie, steal, and cheat, or if they murder and maim. That's what the law is supposed to do. So, Roseanne, at this stage of the game with the Department of Justice and the FBI and all of the other tall building law firm capitulation and everything else, is there is there even a shred of law for the power?
No, there's no shred of law. And that's why episode one of The Con was so important to me because I had seen murderers get off
That's right.
in my neighborhood.
What
Okay.
happens? What happens when you take the cops off the beat, or the cops are corrupt? What happens?
The criminals take over,
That's
and
right.
that's what's going on.
That's what's going on. So you don't have a capitalist system, which means we don't have free markets, which means that the law is unequal. We don't have
Right.
separation of powers. We don't have corruption rules everything. So it's
Yep.
all a lie, everybody. It's just a lie. And so the longer you pretend to play ball in that lie, you're a liar or you're buying lies. So we like to say, stop lying, stop buying lies, because if you understand that Project 2025 is the reason why everything is the way it is at this moment after Doge and after a year of everything Donald Trump and criminality and war making and pedophilia, racketeering, and all the rest of it. Now you know why. Because absolute power corrupts absolutely, which, by the way, has always been the story throughout history. And so the Clean New Deal is democracy's answer, and we need to get 10 millions of people on board. But what we really need is 3.5% of you. Okay. So when you go through this, you'll see all of the different, aspects of it, who we are, how this affects you. We make the case. We say what exactly we must do. So I encourage you to check that out. But more importantly, it's the precepts of the Clean New Deal that put this whole thing together to make you understand what the Democratic Party will not do and what they're not interested in doing. They might take bits and pieces and cherry pick and make it sound like they're about this, but until we have a movement requisite all of this, all of those other elements like Medicare for all and whatever your systemic issue is cannot happen until we purge corruption. So first and foremost, what is power? You got to understand how the power operates. So what is qualified immunity, Roseanne?
Qualified immunity gives law enforcement, and I don't even know what law enforcement means today, but
Or fascism. Go ahead.
yeah, it allows uh, the law enforcement to not be held personally responsible for their actions, like killing George Floyd and on and on and on. Like doing all those things so that they are not held personally responsible. Gotta stop.
If cops aren't afraid to shoot to kill, what's to prevent them from doing other things? It's a slippery slope, like Dr. Phil Zimbardo told us, right? Maybe you start planting drugs on people. Maybe you start walking into people's house. If you're not going to be able to be held accountable for yourself, and let's say you have perverse incentives and you've got like I don't know, a sick president and a sick chief of
You're
staff.
rewarded for doing evil.
That's exactly right. Which, of course, then we become fascists, and that's what we already are. People, Roseanne and I have been, levying and warning about fascism the whole time. It's corruption that creates the ability for fascism to do what it does. And unless you fucking, destroy it, then there's no way you can prevent it. And that's what we're in the midst of. So the second question at that point is, okay, well, if the cops are above the law, what about the judges? Now, I have had many sort of things come down the pike that have taught me that it's really in the federal court system, particularly in the appellate courts recently, that have been challenging, of course, Trump and all of the illegal executive orders and everything else on a constitutional level, and they've been able to hold the line. So there is an argument to have judges, be immune, especially in this particular case. But it is also problematic when you consider the Supreme Court is above the law and they can be completely corrupt to destroy all of the progressive victories that have taken shape over the last 50 years. And, the amazing sacrifice that they just simply etch a sketch, not to mention the entirety of the United States' history by making Donald Trump the king. What's your thoughts on that?
Look, the law is the law. You don't make laws to destroy. You make laws to provide
Accountable for society.
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness possible. You don't make laws for anybody for destruction.
Except that's how the law has been used
That's
throughout
right.
history in
And you don't,
aristocracies. Look, the law can either serve up to circle the wagons around the elite that are pedophiles and criminal con artists and this sort of thing, or and it can come down hard. But that was the reason we had an American Revolution to begin with, guys. And I know, again, for anybody who's a historian and expert, I hope you'll put down in the description, what you want to make as your point. But the bottom line is, guys, they had a revolution to go against King George III and the tyranny, quite frankly, of the East India Trading Company, Parliament, the Red Army, and the Royal Navy. That's called monopoly. That's what it was. That was imperialism. That's what we, rebelled against. And the initial, yes, I do have to say this after watching Ken Burns' documentary. A lot of it was to maintain slavery, and that's horrible. Yes, that was a minutia. That was a problem. So it was white landed gentry, landowners, but they had a couple of geniuses in them to say, yeah, in order to form a more perfect union, and you got to, it was compromise and yada, yada, yada. I mean, look, again, people were not perfect, but at the same time, what we're saying is that we have got to hold the Supreme Court accountable. We have got to make the likes of Clarence Thomas, Alito, Judge Roberts, and so on and so forth. Oh, that was so weird. I had what's it called happen in the background. Oh my God, what is that thing? It heard my voice. One of those things in the house that tell you what the weather is and everything else. Anyway, so moving forward, we got to hold. Nobody should be above the law, and that's part and parcel of the four questions we're putting together. I'll just continue moving through this. Presidential immunity, I think it goes without saying. The emperor's
yeah,
closed. And then ultimately, the big question here is what is the electoral college? In a representative republic, when you can have the minority rule, the majority, you can manipulate it all day long. And that's what the electoral college has been doing, especially in the swing states. And we've got to end that. We have to have just democracy straightforward. That's our position. So please walk us through the precepts of the Clean New Deal, and then we'll say Happy New Year to everybody.
okay. The first one is to recreate a modern day Glass-Steagall Act. And that's so important because you got to separate commercial banking, what we use, from investment banking. And while they're ensuring the full faith and credit of the United States can never again be used to guarantee global financial fraud and racketeering. They can't take our money and bet with it. Okay. It's got to be separate. I've been in a credit union for 30 something years. It's not playing with my money. When Glass-Steagall was taken away by Bill Clinton in in service to modernization, guardrails were gone. Go for it, guys. Do whatever you want. And you know what? We're going to stand right there and we're going to say these fluffy words, but we're not going to do anything. We're going to continue to allow them to rob, cheat, rape, pillage, destroy you and your money. And when you got no money, what do you got? You're out in the street. This shit's got to stop. Okay. We need a new Glass-Steagall and we need enforcement. That's what we need. That's what we need. So if you don't have that, sure, we have to end Citizens United because it's legalized corruption by dark money. That's got to end. But if we keep giving them the money, if we keep giving the fraudsters the money illegally, keep pumping them up. So what? We gotta stop the money. We gotta stop the money. So we need the law, the real law with teeth, with enforcers, a modern day Glass-Steagall. And then we can show you how $71 trillion that was looted illegally by this no good, oh, they betrayed our institutions. They betrayed it. They propped up the billionaires. Let the damn banks fail. Okay. You wanna have good stuff. Set up credit unions. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You can't force these no good thugs above the law and the market forces and reward them. Okay. You're betraying the regular people. Okay. We can take $71 trillion, dollars, get off of fossil fuel. We can have affordable housing. We can have job guarantees. We can put people's talents to good use. We can do what serves the people. This is the public purse. That 71 trillion was created, they created out of thin air because that's what can happen. We don't have anything to back it up. No gold, no soybeans, no rice. What we have to back that money up is the full faith and credit of each and every one of you. When you stop taking that money, when that money is no good, when that money can't buy anything, that's when the full faith and credit is gone.
Look,
The
let me pipe in here real quick because you've conflated a whole lot of economic sort of lessons from macro and micro. I want to try to make this streamlined from this standpoint, guys. We learned the lessons after the Great Depression, which was all built on racial leveraged ratio of trades based on deceptive acts and practices. And that blew up the world. It led to World War II. 70 million people died. We had to rebuild the United States. We had to rebuild the world afterwards. What we ended up doing was we created Keynesian economics, where the government was able to, basically do what the power of the purse of Congress enables it to do. But when you create public works projects and you create initiative that's a surplus for the actual economy, and then you create revenue and all of those sorts of things by creating jobs, and you put the whole country to work, so not just a tiny group of people are making a whole lot of money at everybody else's expense. And if you want a dynamic economy, you have to have guardrails. Otherwise you're going to have people that just basically purge the excuse me they go
It
nuts
always comes back to the law.
because they're like drug addicts. They're crack addicts. What happens if you give a crack addict a safe filled with crack, and then you give him the code to get in it's not going to end well. That's what we're in the midst of right now. And we've already learned these lessons. There was a guy by the name of Ferdinand Pecora back during it rolled into the FDR administration, but it was actually appointed before that. Ferdinand Pecora came out of Tammany Hall. This guy was from Sicily. He was built himself up by the bootstraps, went to law school, got into the system, and he was not an expert in finance, but he was an expert in fraud because he understood the mob. He was the guy that they put in charge of the investigation to sort out what took place to create the Great Depression. And as a result, he made the case to the American people. At that time, there was only three major news services. Everybody was fixated on the time because there was 25% unemployment. The misery was insane, and they brought the pitchforks out to try to recapitulate or recapture government. But ultimately, the wisdom of people within the government decided we're going to have a revolution in our hands, and it could have gone two different ways. Could have gone to communism. It could have gone to fascism, like it did in both Nazi Germany and Stalin's Russia. But what we chose to do was go to the law, and that's what saved the United States. And we ended up with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates Wall Street. and the Securities and Exchange Act. But ultimately, we had the Glass-Steagall Act that separated commercial banking from investment banking, because what Roseanne was saying is you can't gamble with other people's money. Once you do that and you create this composite control fraud that uses modern executive compensation based on short-term profits to feed the kitty, and this is how Elon Musk gets paid. This is how all of the CEOs get paid. They get paid on the bonus culture of what that quarter is involved with based on their stock value. And then there's all sorts of different variables in terms of tax write-ups where they can become uber billionaires. I think, for example, Elon Musk is up to 700 billion right now, something along those facts. And they're not selling more. They're not selling more
Or
Teslas. This
Teslas.
is all part and parcel of the whole thing. But just so you know, again, if you worship money, we've got the $71 trillion truth. There's 1,000 billion in a trillion. This isn't hyperbole. This is actual money that we know, that we can show you, that we do in our platform here, of how the $71 trillion was looted over three administrations, by the way. Started with Obama, lasted, of course, during COVID and
Yeah.
all things Trump and Mnuchin, but also, quite frankly, during Biden. And see, once the system gets a taste of being able to do short-term remedies for big problems by just using the full faith and credit of the United States to backstop criminality, and then they don't, then we get a corrupt court, they're going to wind up with this disaster where everybody is in a, Hindenburg, quite frankly, because that's the way systems work. They either work or they don't. And if they're designed to fail, they're going to fail for the people that know how to pick up the pieces, because they're not going to be touched by this. You are. And so moving forward, you got to understand that the flip side of that is ending Citizens United. Okay. Because if guys who get free money in the system can buy through dark shadow, processes, the government, meaning the legislatures, then they get the rules written for their behalf, or courts that are going to rule on their behalf, which is tyranny. And we're going to approach the 250 year anniversary this next summer, when we want to land with millions of you in Washington, D.C., to basically turn the tables on corruption because of everything that we're telling you. And you have to end Citizens United. Do you see the symmetrical force here? Do you see that when you get free money to crack addicts, and crack addicts can buy the police that are preventing them from getting crack to the streets, they can provide more crack so they can destroy more people. It's pretty much that simple. Does that make sense to you, Roseanne?
Absolutely. It made sense right away because, see, I saw what happened to Addie Polk. I saw it in real life terms. I saw when Bill Black says the best return on investment is donations to a political party. That's your greatest, that's the greatest return. I saw it all the time.
Pay to play, baby. And if it comes from bad sources, you live a lie. That's all there is to it. For all of those who have seen the priest and the church rape the flock and get away with it, it's kind of the same situation. Same with mega churches. And it's all that dark, I keep saying triad, but it's not triad. Dark, whatever, man, between white supremacy and billionaire apparatus and the religious theocracy. I mean, that's a control so that they can rape and pillage all day long. If you can convince the lowest rung white guy he's higher on the highest rung than the highest rung black man, you can pick his pockets all day. Moving
Sure.
forward, we've got to expand SCOTUS to 13 justices to deal with this corrupt Supreme Court. And then we have to end qualified immunity and judicial immunity and presidential immunity and the Electoral College. We have to institute term limits for US senators and representatives, because that's why you end up with tyranny. They write the laws for themselves and the people that are supporting them. And that's the centrifugal force of revolving door. And it look no further. And I think I said it at the beginning of this, Marjorie Taylor Greene, now, being propped up by the New York Times as somebody who's like, what, antithetical to MAGA, even though she was the reason MAGA was so successful in many ways. But they didn't ask how she ended up in Congress with $700,000, and 6 years later is leaving with 27 million. It's like 4.5 million a year. Congress people get paid $160,000 a year, and now all of a sudden she's had a coming to Jesus moment, or the what do we
Yeah,
say,
right.
the road to Damascus moment. I mean, come on, people. How do you have to be? So look, we've talked probably, I think, 2 hours here. This was a big lesson. I'm gonna I'm going to ask you to kind of close us out here. You've done some really, really cool stuff here, and I hope people have gotten to know us, Roseanne, a little bit more. But moving forward into the new year, what is your message to the people out there, and what is your hope?
My message is you must do. I think Yoda said it, okay? There's no try, there's just do. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I found from Victor Hugo yesterday is nothing, nothing is more imminent. It's coming, baby. It's coming. Nothing is more imminent than the impossible. And you know what? I don't believe in impossible. And all I can tell people is do nothing's impossible. People power. Just frickin' take a minute and go for it, baby. Onward.
I'll finish with what I've always known. I don't want to be an American idiot, right? Look, the long and the short of it is we've known about this shit for like now decades, and we're going backwards. All right. Most of what I've laid out here, I've known since the 90s, my friends. And for all of you young guns that are just coming up in the system, that's before you were alive, right? This is stupid. What we're in the midst of is absolutely insane. We've got the black box of truth. We know exactly how this whole thing works. We know who did what, when, and how. We know who's lying to you, why. But we've got to get you to believe and join us on this journey to save our country, to save the nation, and by default, the world. Does that make us your savior? No. The truth is, we're just simply the deliverers, just like Moses and the Red Sea's parted, man. Break the shackles of bondage and let's get going, man. Because on the other side of this, there's nothing that we can't, as a society, accomplish. We just have to have the right incentives. We just have to have the right people, and we have to have the right accountability. Right now, it's a runaway train wreck of corruption. It's pollution. It's already destroyed, killed 600,000 plus in Africa because of U.S. aid. Who knows how many people are suffering in the United States? We've seen ICE. We've seen all of these other elements of just in former time periods in the United States in my lifetime would be an impossibility. But yet now it's normal. People are normalizing this. You have to be outraged. So when you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency, in community and equality and liberty and justice for all and sustainability and beauty, when we merge in liberty behind the Clean New Deal, we will purge the misery of tyranny to unleash the renaissance of possibility, because you must become a nuclear reaction vector to the big bang of truth that we're dropping to force light into this depravity of darkness. That's how the universe works, my friends. That's the opportunity that we have in front of us. Stop lying. Stop buying lies. Roseanne, thank you. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to everybody who's stuck along. Please share this. Please start groups. Please reach out to us. Please reach out to politicians that are running. Put this on their radar. The only way we're going to defeat corruption is with the Clean New Deal. Nobody else has the plan. Thank you.
Happy New Year, my friends.